Hello there, Karington here from Open Heart Games, and I am here with Blue Wendt, who is a veteran game master and content creator for our latest GM One-on-One, I Need a Hero. We're going to be tackling the topic today of running superhero RPGs. In this, we definitely want to hear your questions. We've done two of these. You can catch those on our YouTube channel, which everything's tagged as Open Heart Games. So with that said, welcome, Blue, and thank you for coming today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for reaching out.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what role playing games you're familiar with.
Um, I've been doing this a lot of years, so I was thinking about in prep for this interview. My first contact with role playing games, and it had to be very shortly after the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master Guide came out, because my cousin had that book and that book only. Showed it to me, and I had my nose stuck in it for the rest of that afternoon. And I've never looked back. Uh, Dungeons and Dragons in every incarnation except the original pamphlet books, the chainmail books.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think the next book, a game that I played was the old Phase the Rip Marvel Superheroes, the original Marvel Superheroes game. Played every edition of that. Um, but I've played, my 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 workspace isn't fully organized yet, but I've played and run dozens of games. I wrote for White Wolf back in the day, around the second edition
What did you
time
write
period.
for White Wolf?
I wrote Traditions of the Mages, second edition for the Mage game. I wrote a number of things for the Exalted uh, product line, the original Exalted product line. I also had a couple pieces in their Swords and Sorceries D20 line. So
Excellent. So as we talked about a minute ago, today's GM One-on-One is going to focus on running superpowered RPGs. And for those listening at home, how would you define superhero RPGs?
that's uh, that's a loaded question, and I'm
Of
sure we'll get into
course.
a lot more detail. Um, on the surface, a superhero RPG, I think most people think the traditional superheroes that we're familiar with: Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Wolverine. Um, and there have been a number of games that are built explicitly around that. Um, but superhero, uh, I think probably the best definition is any game that lets you sort of emulate that uh, sense of superheroic feats, bigger than life, but still sort of grounded in the world.
Okay. So here's another. Since we'll follow up a loaded question with another loaded question, which is, would you classify like your standard D&D party as a group of superheroes, for lack of a better term?
They absolutely could be. Uh, it really depends the scale you play, and I think the modern 5e game gives you lots of options. But if you move into that sort of high magic, high power level uh, style of game where your heroes are routinely doing epic things, that's definitely superhero. What do you
Sure.
have? You've got distinctive appearances, you've got abilities beyond that of mortal men, and you're fighting threats that no one else could.
Sure. Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
like it to me.
Yeah. And I guess also like that like if your party is like, all right, what are we gonna do? We're gonna save the world again. I think you're in that in that realm for sure. Um,
Absolutely.
so what would you say is your favorite part about running superpowered RPGs?
Um, that's it goes back, back again into the Wayback Machine. Um, I moved around a lot as a kid. I like to say, and it's true, I went to 13 schools in 13 years of schooling, from kindergarten to freshman year of college. And the constant for me, once I was able to read, was comic books, and particularly superhero comic books. I remember we had lived in California for a couple of years before coming back to the Great Lakes region. And my mom purchased me two or three comic books just to keep me quiet while we're driving. Um, and it was comics ever since. When they were in the grocery stores, I'd get them off the grocery stores. When I was old enough to go to comic book stores, I bought them there. And so supers are very uh, very much a part of my psyche and how my idealistic world is. So for me to run a supers game with that sort of over the top genre is sort of natural, my default mode. Um, Plus, honestly, I like creating the characters. So, my players, what we'll typically do is we run in a hybrid universe somewhere between DC and Marvel,
Hmm.
um, and I'll just create characters as I need them, much like the old comic book creators did. So,
Excellent. And I definitely want to invite any of the folks who are in chat. If you have any questions at all about running superhero RPGs or any of the topics you'd like to see us tackle, feel free to go ahead and drop those questions in the chat, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Um, so with superhero RPGs, I mean, this is a great time to tackle this topic because superheroes are in the cinema, and like whether you're a DC fan or a Marvel fan or anywhere in between, we're seeing so many of like just the proliferation. We've seen this over the past couple of decades where there's more and more, and now we're even getting to some of the more interesting characters where we have like characters who've never had their time in the sun, like Moon Knight is a great example that has his own series, which is phenomenal, and I love to see those kind of like, I wouldn't call them side characters, not nearly loved as much characters, let's call them that, getting their time in the sun, and that's wonderful that they're able to kind of really dive into that. Um,
yeah,
so
definitely. And I wouldn't leave out, you mentioned Marvel and DC. We also have The Boys, we have
yep.
Jupiter's Legacies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the big independent books
Mm-hmm.
also have TV and movies now. So I think we're in a new golden age of superheroes in some real
Absolutely,
sense.
with a golden age of superheroes on the silver screen. Put a TM right on there. When you're trying to bring these a lot of times not even like figuratively larger than life, sometimes actually larger than life, in like Ant-Man or Giant Man or something like that. When you're trying to bring these characters to life or bring your players' characters to life, there's a lot of challenges that it comes to when you're trying to run these worlds. So, what would you say as a game master is it is the biggest challenge for game masters when it comes to running a super powered RPG?
Um, I think it's the biggest challenge, I think, for any genre, but I think it's doubly so for superheroes or anything where you're sort of dealing with licensed characters or properties or worlds. It's expectations. Um, you know, Somebody says, I want to play Batman or I want to play in Gotham City. There have been 75 years of history of Batman in Gotham City. So which version and what does that mean? Is it the dark and gritty 80s, I'm Batman, or is it, or is it the television, the campy television series? And so, I mean, it's like I say, it's true for any game, but it's particularly true when you're dealing in this space. Everybody's got to be on the same page. You're all got to be playing in the same genre and the same subgenre. And somebody other than me introduced the idea of session zero, but I at this point when I'm running a new game, whether it's supers or something else, we'll probably have 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks of side conversations in a Discord or a chat somewhere about what we're interested in, what we want to do. Still have a session zero
Mhm.
before we even start playing.
Yeah, I think that being able to set those expectations so that you can knock them down and meet them is great. Side comment: Carrington's hot take, which I'm gonna get, I'm sure, flack for. I think that Adam West is one of the best Batman. That is an unpopular opinion. I have a lot of unpopular opinions, as a kid, I grew up watching the show,
Yeah.
and so like even though it was zany, crazy antics, like it for me, it was so much fun. But then also like I loved the animated series. It was a much darker Bruce Wayne and Batman. But I
Yeah.
digress.
Yeah, but I saw somebody, some time ago say, why is it so hard to write Batman these days? Which Batman do you want?
Yeah.
What aspect of his personality have you not explored yet?
Yep.
Um, you know, you have just about every Batman you could want, and that's before you go into alternate worlds.
There's a great meme about this exact thing, which is and it's a crossover with Dungeons and Dragons where they take Batman and they put him on all 9 points of the alignment chart. So from everything from lawful good to chaotic evil, you know.
Yep.
And I think that right because there's some times when like Batman is really dark, especially like the Nolan series talks. There's that scene where he's just like, if you're going to intimidate someone, pick a better spot. This won't kill me, and then he's just like throws him and breaks his legs. Like that's really dark and very tortury.
Yeah.
So like that scene made me incredibly uncomfortable. But granted the guy's a bad guy, but we could talk. We'd have an entire discourse about that. But yeah, like you're right. Which Batman do you want? How dark do you want it to be? How light do you want it to be? And et cetera, et cetera. So for me, when it comes to running superpowered RPGs and the challenges, I always struggle with meeting the expectation of scale, and I feel like because if you're doing a one shot, I think it's really easy, and this is just my opinion. I've most of my experience with, and I actually took stock right before this. My experience with superpowered RPGs are I've played Mutants and Masterminds, I've played the Hero System, I have watched Sentinel Comics RPG, which is Sentinels of the Multiverse, being
Yep.
played, and then I've also taken a look at Masks. So those are the four that I have. And I actually did again a little bit of research before this. There's so many RPGs out there nowadays
Oh yeah.
that are doing superpowered. But my struggle has been scale. How do you like if you're doing a one shot where you're like, okay, you are a superhero, you're established, you've been doing stuff. Now it's time to save the world. Like that's an easy story to tell. But are your players going to be bored with, the just like, all right, you're a superhero, you're new, and you're your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Like, are your player when do you how do you scale up and is it possible to after you scaled up to scale back down? Because like once you've kind of like you've saved the world. If every situation after that isn't saving the world, it doesn't feel as it feels like it doesn't track. And my wife and I are watching through all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer right now, and that's one of the things is it feels like they're saving the world. We're like in the last season, it feels like they're saving the world every other episode, and how do you fix that? So I guess as you've run a lot more superpowered RPGs, how do you address that or how do you fix that?
So, first of all, I think you just described the history of DC Comics.
Okay, excellent.
Um, and so, one answer is look at what DC's done, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the real answer is this. I mean, so first you decide where you want to start. I've started with fully established, Avengers, A tier heroes. I've started with the students at the Peter Parker School for Superheroes, um, and everything in between. And so that's certainly part of it. And if everyone's bought in, that scale is part of it and natural.
Mhm.
Um, Part of it is um, advancement. So a place where I don't want to say struggle, but I spend a lot of time thinking about advancement in superhero games. Do superheroes get better? Mm, they get better when the writer changes or when the narrative needs them. Um, so that's another thing to keep in mind is what level do you need to be uh, for this narrative. Um, Batman's a I had I toyed a number of times with writing my own super systems, and at one point I'm like, Batman is the smartest person in the room. Um, but what that means depends on what book he's in. If he's in
Mm-hmm.
his book, that means one thing, but if he's in the Justice League book, may mean something different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so though all those things have to keep in mind, let the narrative drive. But have I run games where they've saved the universe? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the high-powered games. They save the world, they save the universe. Um, 9 times out of 10, we're done with that story. And then we tell another story. Maybe it has some of the same characters, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it has some of their legacy characters. Um, and those characters will come back and they cameo in things
Mm-hmm.
all the time. Um, but I really try to think about it like a movie or a comic book or a movie universe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tony and Cap and arguably Thor are retired, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be the Avengers anymore. So, that naturally brings this power scale down. Um,
One of the things that I like to use as far as like showing growth as a demonstration in a quote D&D campaign is Avatar: The Last Airbender,
mm,
and watching Katara grow. In the first scene that you see her, she she in one of the first episodes she freezes, like half freezes Sokka, and he's like, just guy with a boomerang, and he has to like chip himself out because she's still learning her powers. And then you watch her grow, and then in the last season when she confronts, and I'm spoilers for, by the way, spoilers for Avatar: Last Airbender. I bet you didn't know they were going to come here, so now's your time to either pause the video or turn the sound off. She confronts the man who killed her mother, and she stops the rain, like in the area around her, because she's become that powerful. Like she has grown, and then Zuko kind of looks up and is just like, she could have killed me anytime. um, but I think that seeing the hero scale up is important. I just it's I think it's hard. I think you kind of have to just kind of like continue to scale up to a point, and then once they've saved the universe, I think then it's time for a new story.
yeah,
And let those characters live on in the mythos of the universe, or maybe they retire, or maybe they die,
yeah,
because the cost is there. Um,
yeah. So that's an interesting thing you talk about how watching that character evolve.
mhm,
That in play is a collaborative effort. Um,
absolutely.
so the player, again, back to session zero and buy-in, the player has to say, you know what, I want to start at this lower level, and yeah, I've got these powers, but they're going to describe them in I only freeze half of him, or I
Hmm.
only, and sure, the numbers may be going up at the same time in the background, but their description should be evolving as well.
Hmm.
If you start with somebody who comes in and they want to be full powered and they're not giving themselves a lot of place to grow,
Yep.
and that's their choice.
I think that, as you mentioned, the session zero, I think that's a good time to really focus in on making sure that you are setting expectations with your players, and being able to, I would, if I were running a superpowered RPG, I would say, all right, my vision for the campaign is that we're going to start with like back alley heroes, and then by the end of the campaign we're going to be saving the city, or maybe even the world, like that. And that way it gives the players, before they've even had a chance to really conceptualize their characters, they can go, okay, I want to start off with a character who's in an Xavier style school, who's learning the ropes and whatnot, or I want to play as a character who's just a bare knuckle boxer, who is trying to grow as as a person and do the right thing, and so on and so forth. But I think that that's the big thing: setting expectations. I think in super powered RPGs of the scale, that sliding scale, I think setting those expectations from the beginning is more important in superpowered RPGs than it is in any other system, I would argue.
Yeah. And most of them don't do a real good job of identifying where you are on the scale.
Yep.
The more modern ones do,
Mm-hmm.
um, but early on, no, not so much.
For sure.
You touched a little bit on a thing that I've struggled with um, as a GM, and I'm mostly over it now. This idea of what is my plan? All right. So as a writer, I want to surprise my audience and give them twists and things to look forward to. Um, but as a collaborative storyteller, because that's really what we are when we're playing role-playing games, sometimes those secrets or those surprises need to be discussed before they come to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a couple of games sort of go pretty badly south because I came in with what I was thought was a cool twist and really didn't meet the expectations of the players. Was not well received. So again, good advice for any game, but particularly in supers
Yep.
where literally anything can happen, doubly so.
Yep. Yep. I think the biggest takeaway from that is, set expectations, make a promise, and then deliver, for sure. We actually have our first question.
Cool.
This is from Ahas. Hey, that's my wife. Yay.
Hey.
Would you say it is more challenging to create a good villain when your superheroes have superpowers? How does the strength of the heroes influence how you use the character of the villain? It's a great question.
Great question.
Also, it's a 2-for-1, but we'll let it slide.
Man, villains are incredible, right? And there's always two things you think about with a villain. First of all, are my heroes going to punch through this villain like wet tissue paper?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a mechanical thing, and that's every game ever, right? Whether it's Marvel or D&D or what have you, we've all had that as GMs had that opportunity. We've really crafted this great villain, and they were down in the first combat,
Yep.
and first round of combat, and you don't know what's going on. So yeah, mechanically, you gotta make sure you're scaling to that. I'm gonna probably say here's a blue hot take. Don't be afraid to cheat at the table.
Yep.
Add extra hit points, fudge your dice rolls, whatever it takes. Especially in supers, because if you want those players to feel like the superheroes they are, they need to feel that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing it, you're not fudging to win. You're fudging to give them the experience they came to.
Mm-hmm.
That's all mechanical. The other side, and this is the place where the writer in me comes in, and where I think a lot of folks think about what your villain wants and why they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, true for anything, but especially in a superheroic world where, again, literally anything can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this person a villain? Why are they doing this thing? I remember a comic panel. Spider-Man is talking to I can't remember his name. Dr. Carl Lycos. He's Sauron. He's a Petroton man. And Spider-Man's like, you are such a fantastic scientist. You could cure cancer. Why are you turning people into dinosaurs? Because I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs. He had that in life. And it's true. What is it that villain wants? Why are they trying to destroy the Earth?
Mm-hmm.
Just to destroy it? That's kind of boring.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the original Crisis, you look at the Anti-Monitor, he wasn't just trying to destroy everything. He was trying to get things back to parity.
Mm-hmm.
One world, one universe, preferably under his rule. And we've
Sure.
seen that pattern over and over and over again in comics.
I mean, Ultron, right? Once his directive is peace in our time, and so he is given that as his mission, and he tries to do it as best he can. I think that like my model for making villains is, and actually any NPC is that I ask myself a series of questions. The first is, who are they? Like, who is this person? And who is this person before they decided to go on whatever path that they're on, before they interact with the heroes? The second is what do they want, um, and that could be anything from they want to rule the world, they want revenge, they want, I mean, like they want to protect a loved one. I mean, love is a very powerful motivator. I mean, look at Mr. Freeze. Mr.
Yep.
Freeze is willing to do anything to save his wife.
Yep.
And so after you've asked yourself those questions, who are they? What do they want? And the next is, what are they willing to do for it? Do they have any? Do they have any things? And what are they actively doing right now?
Right.
And as the player, or as this villain is interacting, you can have them have a plot that the players do not see, and they're actively ask yourself during your campaign, while my heroes are over doing a shopping quest or whatever, what is my villain doing right now?
Oh yeah.
And is there
Oh
a
yeah.
chance for them to either intersect? Can they pick up the breadcrumbs of this, and so on and so forth? Like think about what your motivations are for your villains, because I think that
Yeah.
they can be really good foils. They're
Yeah.
the best foils for your heroes. So
You talked about scale earlier, and I think one of the ways you can do that is to have multiple plots going on at a time. Um, and you should, right? It brings your world to life, right? Again, whether it's 5e or supers, stuff's happening. Your heroes may be the most powerful in the world, but they're not the only thing that's happening. And again, going back to Crisis on Infinite Earths, um, part of what made that so powerful was for, when I want to say a year leading into it, you just had this mysterious figure in the background observing the heroes. And so this secondary plot was building in the background.
mhm.
Um, and it wasn't until uh, that first issue, and even after that first issue, uh, you could see the effects of Crisis throughout the individual issues and storylines. It was different, handled differently than I know I'm going into comics. This is not Blue Loves comics, but it's handled a bit differently than the modern events where everything sort of turns and focuses just on that event. It was life's going on. What else is happening in life? There's a game I want to run, and I just haven't had the right opportunity yet, which is basically delisters in Crisis. Um, there's one of these big universe shattering events, and you're not the big heroes, you're not the big guns, you're in the background. What are you doing while this is all going on?
Yep.
Um,
And that can be as simple as stuff from like keeping people from robbing banks or looting, to protecting the citizenry, to digging through buildings to save survivors and so on and so forth. Dealing with lesser minions. I mean, there's a lot you could do there.
oh yeah.
Um, I'll make sure that we answered the question. So when we say that there's a challenging to create a good villain, superpowers. I mean, I think that the nice thing about superpowers and superpowered villains is, the sky's the limit, and as you mentioned earlier, you can really dial in what what the to kind of match what the super you know um, what superheroes and your players have. So you can really dial in, like, for example, like, let's say that they're just like at the very base, a supervillain like the Rhino, who's just really strong and has the motivation of just greed. It's a really simple story. He runs through a bank, and you have to deal with the consequences therein. I think that's a really good way to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the things I was thinking about, I think it was earlier today, is when I'm designing uh, master villain, a major character, um, first is play to the character's weaknesses
hmm
and play to their strengths.
hmm
So uh, the weaknesses part is to make sure they're feeling challenged and make sure that they're you know having a fight that's worth having, or a conflict that's worth having. But then you play to those strengths as well, so that once they figure out the trick, or they reach a critical point, they can really feel heroic. And that combination is what propels it from just a good fight to an epic fight, I think.
Absolutely. The second question was, and just make sure that we answered it. How does the strength of the heroes influence how you use the character of the villain? I think we pretty much covered that with just making sure that they're a good foil. I think both in combat and also as they don't have to be a mustache twirling villain, but letting them somehow interact, whether it be through leaving behind a calling card or clues, or trapping them behind a wall of force, and then like giving them a small monologue or taunting them, or even just like there's that that I'm going back to Age of Ultron because I love Ultron as in the new iteration of Ultron as a villain.
Yeah.
That scene where like he's just like hey, what's the vibranium for? And he's like, I'm glad that you asked. I wanted to take this time to explain my evil plan. And then like he does not tell him until he is assured that his victory is a foregone conclusion. He does not reveal his plan until then. Which, I mean, that is definitely like, I think there's a lot of tropes in comics that
Yep.
are absolutely ripe to be explored and, in my opinion,
Yep.
twisted. I love the idea of like Ozymandias in Watchmen.
Yep.
He's just like when spoilers for that as well. If you've not seen it, it's been out for like what 15 years. Like I don't feel bad about spoiling that one. But like at the end of that, he says, I triggered this 15 minutes ago before you even walked in the door. Like he didn't wait to, just like say, haha, I got it, and now you get to watch me. He's just like, I'm done. I've succeeded at my goal.
I know
Um,
how it would have been. I think Watchmen, and again, I'm going back to the comic.
sure.
It's a great way, gives us some great ideas on how to deal with incredibly powerful characters, whether they're heroes or otherwise. And the answer to that, when we think about Dr. Manhattan, right,
Oh yeah.
is the more powerful the characters are, the more heavily you have to rely on role playing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Dr. Manhattan can do literally everything. So, what are the most interesting scenes we see? The one where he's with his wife and she is upset because she knows he's also working in the lab and doing something else, and
Mm-hmm.
he's not entirely there with her. Um, and he doesn't even understand that anymore, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and so
Yeah, and the
I think,
comedian says to him, like, "You're losing it, Doc.
yeah,
You're losing the connection with humanity."
yeah,
Yeah. And watching things from his perspective are very interesting because the way he jumps and skips and dives back and forth through time, I think
yeah,
is very, very interesting. So um, that is a great segue into my next question, which is any time that we are dealing with superpowers, it feels like characters can very easily become overpowered, whether it become whether it be through mechanics or through story or what have you, whether you have min maxers or not. So, how do you rein these powerful characters in? I think we touched on this just a moment ago.
you know, you have two approaches. One is the authority approach, so the original Wildstorm comic, where any of those characters could literally do whatever they wanted. Hollow, Midnighter, Jenny Sparks, the Doctor, the Engineer. Um, and how did they deal with them? Um, they just, they opened up the multiverse and threw the multiverse at them. They were constantly fighting um, things much more powerful than they were, and they were fighting. In some ways, the it was not as obvious in the book, but it was there. The opinion of the populace, right? They were pissing off governments by, say, dealing with drought infected areas, and so there are consequences to your actions. The other one is what I call the Superman approach, right? Superman, he can do anything, especially the Silver Age Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'll just fly backwards around this Earth and I'll go back in time. Okay, great. I can do whatever I want. Um, but he had Lois and he had Jimmy, and he had to, it was grounded there, and they were real weaknesses for him. He
Mm-hmm.
had to go save them.
Yep.
uh, 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 in that, that's there, and live the life with him, like, you know, be Clark Kent to Lois Lane because he truly was enamored of her. Um, I think the modern, I want to say Superman and Lois show is a not as nearly as campy, but another great example of this where, he's trying to, have a family and run a farm in Smallville, but he can still hear all the crises around the earth. And oh, and if there are spoilers to this, I apologize. When he helps someone in China, the US government gets pissy with him because why are you helping them? Um, and so trying to balance all of the humanity part against the God part of the superpowers. You want to hit your heroes where they are. You hit them in their human bits.
Hmm. And I think that that's so important because, when we have these heroes that are going on these incredibly epic journeys, especially when it comes to, like, one of my favorite examples is Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man is someone when he's a kid that doesn't quite fit in. He's just trying to find his place in the world, and then he gets swept up in these things, and we can see ourselves, as just because everyone has felt that, whether you're the most popular kid on the planet or not, like you have one time or another have felt you've been in a room where you feel like you don't fit in,
Yeah,
and being able to connect with that and just wanting to be able to be your own person and find who you are, is very, very relatable.
yeah.
um, and then we are able to then relate to that moment when they're just like us, and then we go on a journey with them to the universe and beyond. And I think that that's really important and really special. um, so here's a question. Since we were talking about like grounding our players in this world, and
Mhm.
also their powers. A lot of times in superhero RPGs, and this is a big supposition, but if you have one or two players in your group that are just incredibly powerful. So, for example, like I mean, a good example of this is like in the Avengers. So let's say that you have Hulk, who is just incredibly strong. You have you have Thor, who's a god, little g, but a god. You have Captain America, who is a super soldier, and then you have Tony Stark, who is a super genius in a mechanized suit of armor and all this stuff. And then you've got like Clint, who's a guy with a bow and arrow, and Natasha, who's a spy. Like, how do you balance the experience for your Clints and your Natashas when it comes to them saving the world?
I think the MCU has done a really great job of a couple of things. First of all, we talked about scale earlier, and we've seen various characters sort of go up and down in their power scale across the journey. Tony is a great example, right? Was it Iron Man 3 where he didn't have anything for much of that movie,
Mm-hmm.
and then introduced this whole idea of the Iron Armory. Spoilers, apology. Uh, um,
Sure.
um, so there in Spider-Man's arc, I will say anything else about that. Another great example. Um, but what's the other thing they do? They play to their strengths. So, what are the best scenes we see with Natasha? They're usually not fighting, and they're certainly not fighting superpower things. Um, I'm remembering, and I forget which movie it is, but she's tied to a chair, and
Oh,
Fury
that's
calls her.
that's her introduction in the Avengers.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
And Fury calls her in, and she's like, "I had him right where I want him,"
He was
and
giving
she
me
did,
anything.
right?
He said, "I'm not giving him." It's
You
great.
know,
Yeah.
or the others when she's having those moments with either the Hulk or Banner, where there's this like again the humanity is what's there. Um, but even in Endgame, when we see that epic master battle, and we see all those wonderful heroes, they're all identifying the targets they can take. Um, whether it's shooting down small craft with the arrows, or web slinging the gauntlet across the battlefield, or the Hulk or not Hulk, Thor and Cap tossing the weapons to one another. It's give each of them their moment to shine. Um, but again, it's two-parted, right? So two-sided. So if we set up you set it up as a game master, and there's opportunities for everybody there, but you have one player who insists on going against the big bad every time, even though they're going to get their ass kicked,
Hmm.
that's on them, right? You don't see Hawkeye running up against Thanos because Hawkeye knows he can't do anything there, but
Right.
he can't keep the minions down. Um, we talked a little bit before what I've been playing in lately. I'm playing in a homebrew 5e, and I'm playing a bard. I okay, there's one time I pulled my weapon. I don't pull my weapon. I'm largely support, or I'm you know one of my favorite combos is vicious
Vicious
uh,
mockery.
dissident whispers,
Oh yeah,
uh,
yeah.
where
Run
I
away. Go away.
you have them run away, but they're
Yeah.
already engaged with two of my allies,
Hmm.
who then get their attacks of opportunity. So
Hmm.
it's almost like I'm tripling my damage
Hmm.
by doing that. But if I went in and pulled my rapier and I went up against what we were fighting last night, an Oni, I'd get my butt handed to me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
It's
and
almost like that Yaskier approach to being a bard, where it's just like I'm here to help everyone else look good and to tell a story and maybe earn some coin along the way. Yeah, for
right.
sure. I
But you got to play the character you set out to play. And if you want to play Hawkeye as a player, play Hawkeye. Don't try to play Thor.
right. Yeah, I now I kind of want to play in a super powered RPG, and I just want to play like from Deadpool. I just want to play Peter, a guy who saw like an advertisement and is just like, I want to do this. Hopefully not with the same outcome. Uh, but maybe just playing maybe some person who just wants to be a superhero. I feel like that would be a lot of fun. Um,
I have for many years had a title for a superhero game in my head, called Four Colors Shades of Gray. Um, and it's a turning the trope on its ear. So
mhm,
most of the time when we play superheroes, it's all about the action. And if there's any real life, it's largely sort of off camera in between
mhm,
sessions. I want to run a game where it's about the real life stuff,
mhm.
and you run off, and the big comic book fights are happening off screen in between sessions.
Yeah, that would be cool for sure. And we were talking a little earlier, like some of like Coulson, Nick Fury, these are just people,
Yeah,
who I mean, granted, like Nick Fury has access to a ton of resources, and I think that's his superpower. Um, but he's at the end of the day, he's just a guy. He's
yeah,
just a guy doing
yeah,
stuff, and same thing with Coulson.
yeah,
And in Agents of Shield, like all of those people are very similar, same way.
yeah.
Um, so here's a question for you. Um, so what resources would you suggest for someone who wants to get started today running superpowered RPGs? I mean, I don't know if I even have any input on this because like there's just because my experience and my exposure to running superpowered RPGs is fairly limited. Um, but
Um, First and foremost, know the genre.
know the
Uh,
genre.
and I would even say the subgenre. And so, I've didn't use it in this. I've talked with my players about session -1, which is okay, what do we even want to play? Do we want to play supers? Do we want to play fantasy? Do we want to play in the Marvel universe? Do we want to play in a custom universe? What do we want to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and when I do that, it's so I have time to prep and do research. So Um, so let's say people, your players just got done watching Moon Knight, the latest episode of Moon Knight. They want to play superheroes because Moon Knight's got them excited. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
understand what that urban street level hero looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Go read some of the Moon Knight books, read some of the other and they've had different titles over the years, but what I call the Marvel Knights books,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Blade or whether it's Spider-Man or Ghost Rider. um Ghost Rider can be a little more powerful, but generally sort of more Daredevil, another great example. um Black Widow. Go read those books and understand what that universe is like, and get some ideas from that. Um, if you're not GM'd before, internet man, look up, look up, look up. I'm not going to give you specifics. Anything you have a thought on, look it up. Somebody's probably done something. If they haven't, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll get some interesting stuff. To this day, I still do that. If I'm like, has anyone done a Black Hammer DC crossover? Oh, look, turn out how it is. I go out and get that book. Um, and then the hardest thing is system, and we've sort of talked around system.
Sure.
Um,
Is there, not to put you on the spot, but is there a system that you would recommend that someone look into or start with, and why or why not do you feel that way?
yeah, thank you. Okay, so I said earlier, I played every iteration of the Marvel games. I've loved all of them, honestly. And I have the plate literally. It's here on the desk next to me. I have the play test rule book for the Marvel Multiverse role playing game that came out this week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to exclude that from my ranking for the moment because I'm still pondering it. Um, I love the original Marvel Phaser Rip percentile dice, looking up colors. It was revolutionary for the time. Do I recommend it now? Maybe. There's some good
Okay.
games that have basically taken that and brought it back to life with a lot of the Marvel TM rubbed off. The next game I played a lot of was Champions, the hero
Mm.
system. I know from past conversations it's not a favorite of yours necessarily, Carrington.
Well,
Um, uh, but we played the heck out of it in college. Um, and again, I think it was it was one of my first examples of generic role playing systems that then applied to supers. Um, and it was great for what it was in the time. Uh, Recently, in the last, I don't know, decade or so, several variations of the Cortex rules. We played Smallville, we played the Marvel Cortex. Um, at this point, I pretty much just bashed the pieces they were like out of Cortex. There's a great rule set that Cam Banks was putting together. He's now sold that to someone else, which gives you lots of flexibility. Um, all of these, I think, if you're an experienced game master and if you've played multiple systems, any of those can work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with Great Power, or no, Wild Talents. I mean, I played With Great Power too, also a good one. But Wild Talents is another one that's a little more crunchy, like Champions. But
Yep. And I guess
uh,
on that note, I want to clarify. Um, so with champions, uh, I as a game master fall much more on the storytelling aspect of things, and so like if I can, I don't know, I want to have oatmeal. I don't want to have too much crunch
right,
in my role playing systems because if it gets too much in the way of me being able to tell a story, for me that can be very frustrating because I want to be able to be a little loose so I can. I can ad hoc make a ruling or go in a different direction, and whatnot. And if I have to like roll on a table to look at a table to look at a table, or if it takes me longer than an hour to create a character, my eyes start glazing over.
totally, totally, 100% get that. So, of everything I've mentioned, if you're comfortable with not D&D systems,
Hmm.
Cortex, I think, is the way I would roll
Hmm.
because you do get a lot of flexibility.
Yep.
If you're comfortable homebrew hacking, pulling pieces in, putting pieces back. Um, yeah, unfortunately, the Smallville and the Marvel game are no longer in print, so you won't have those resources. But I do know that the Cortex, oh, I don't remember, the most recent version is available.
Hmm.
Um, that said, and I'm not paid by Marvel in any way, I really love what I'm seeing in the new Marvel Multiverse game.
Hmm.
Um, it is, and I am probably going to get hate mail for this, but I'm looking at it and it's as close to a Dungeons and Dragons superhero game as with modern aesthetics as I've seen. And so let me just share a couple things about the game, um, that why I say it. So, first of all, it's called the 616 system.
Hmm.
You're basically rolling 3d6s. If you roll a six, a one, and a six, that turns out to be really good. And if you're a fan of Marvel, you understand that 616 is the main comic book universe.
Oh, one thing if I steal your thunder here, I apologize. I did a
Yeah.
little bit of research on this and I thought it was really neat. So the 616 is the main Marvel universe.
Yeah.
The Marvel Cinematic Universe exists over here, and it's like Earth like 17,000 whatever, completely different name. But the world that you create, you can give your own designation,
Yeah.
and it's your own canon, and you can do whatever you want, which is
Yes.
cool.
Which is great. And they're very explicit about that. But when you're rolling 3d6s, it turns out the average on that should say, I'm a PhD statistician, I'm a recovering academic, but when you roll the average of 3d6, you get 10.5. When you roll a d20, the average is 10.5.
Okay.
So mechanically, while things weight a little closer to the center, you're essentially rolling the same thing for success in both
Hmm.
systems. Um, the new Marvel game, it has you're described by what rank of character you are. If you're starting, you might be rank one. If you're sort of street level, you might be rank five, ranging up all the way to 25. Um, but sounds very much like levels to me. When you're talking about putting together your character, that has six ability scores. Um,
I did
might,
see that, and they feel very, very similar to Strength,
yeah,
Dex, Con, which is good. I mean, whether I don't want to in any way insinuate that they looked at anyone else's homework and took notes, but I
no,
think that a lot of role players are very familiar with the six stats,
yeah,
and instead of reinventing the wheel, just use what works. And if you have to, I mean, for example, Star Wars: The Old Republic uses a very similar system, or did for a very long time.
yeah.
And they just renamed the six stats because they based it off of Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. So I don't think there's any problem with that in my
No, and
mind.
the stats spell out Marvel. If I don't know if you've picked up on that yet, but
That's adorable. I love that.
um,
So.
but it's great, and and then when you're building out your character, um, you basically choose your class. Are you a
Mhm.
brick? Are you a hitter? Are you what? So it is very familiar to feeling to the 5e. So I think this is genius for Marvel and the mouse, and I don't know which branch of Marvel is releasing this, but uh, I think it's genius,
Mhm.
um, because it will make it accessible in a way that a lot of past games really haven't been. Um,
Absolutely.
and so tentatively, this is not my two thumbs up. This is my thinking about putting two thumbs up. I would look at the Marvel Multiverse game. Um, it, and I would do that over Cortex for the two reasons. One, should be very accessible if you're used to modern 5e or
Mhm.
really D&D at any point. Um, and two, it should have support material starting next year as the main game rolls out.
Yep. And it is also available. If you're not able to get a print copy, I know that the playtest is also available on Roll20. I'm probably going to buy it and take a look at it and give my assessment on it as well, probably on our blog. So we do only have a few minutes left. Wow, the time just really flies.
I warned you.
Oh, for sure. So I wanna see if there are any last minute questions. If you have any burning questions, now is the time. But yeah, so I guess we'll see if chat has any last minute questions before we go. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in the in seeing more about the Marvel system. It looked very neat, and again, I only gave it a cursory glance. I looked it over for for a few minutes before we started streaming. But again, you're right. It feels very familiar, at least at a first glance, and I'm definitely interested in seeing what that comes to. All right. Since I don't see any questions in chat yet, I'm going to ask my favorite question, which is, if there's one thing that you hope that people in the audience today would take away from our chat today, what would it be?
The one thing. I'm going to diverge very briefly, although it probably is my answer as well. The movie City Slickers, which is very old, and I suspect many folks will not remember at this point. Billy Crystal asked Jack Palance, what's the secret of life? And Jack Palance is playing this grizzled old cowboy, and Billy Crystal is a city boy out on his first cattle drive. And Jack Palance puts one finger and points up to the air. This. And Billy Crystal's question was, what, your finger? He says, no, one thing. Well, what's the one thing? That's what you have to figure out. So I could stop there and say my one thing is you figure it out. Sure. Honestly, I think it's about communication and expectations. Mm-hmm. Honestly, you can run superheroes in any system if everyone around the table is on board with you. Mm-hmm. You can play any level of power or not power. You can deal any level of combat or not combat. All that is flexible. As long as everyone at the table is on board, engaged with what you want to do, and ready to partner with you to tell those stories. That's my one thing.
Absolutely. And I agree, like, whether it be this or any, but I think mostly for superpowered RPGs is the idea of making sure that you're setting expectations, having those conversations with your players, and then making promises in your story, and then most importantly delivering on those promises to give that really epic feel. And going into those and really making it personal for the characters and giving them a chance, giving them agency in the world that you're playing in, for sure. Again, Blue, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoy what we do here on Open Heart Games, you can help us out in several different ways. You can like us on our Facebook. We have an Instagram page that features heavily our cat Elspeth. We also have a YouTube page, and you can like and subscribe here on Twitch. So with that, thank you all so much for joining. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. It was a great fun.
And take heart.